Okay, let's start. So this section of the lecture is really going to talk about forms and form submission and so on and so forth. So suppose you want to add a new movie to Rotten Potatoes. You want to have a nice form that you can do that with. How do you do that? So if we think back to CRUD, create, read, update, destroy, we want to basically have two new actions. The first one is new, and what that action does is actually present you the form that you can use to create the new movie, right? And what create actually does, it submits the filled-in form, and adds that instance of the model into the database. So this pattern you're going to see is common to what we're going to do. We're going to have one action that presents you with the form to do the change, and the second action is what actually commits that change. So how do we generate and display this form? And how do we get the values that are filled into the form when the form is submitted? So we're going to go over that really quickly. And finally, what do we return? So in this case, when we're dealing with web applications, what do we render after the create has occurred? So basically, you're going to have to learn a lot of convention in the next few slides, so we're going to go over conventions. When we want to create a new form, what the general strategy is that you want to identify the action that generates the form itself. Then you want to identify the action that receives the results of filling that form in. Given those two things, you're going to create routes and actions and views for each thing. You guys have seen creating routes and actions already. We're just going to create new ones. And the magic that occurs is that when we look at the form, each form element has a name. And these are the attributes that control how the values will appear in your controller. And in your controller, you'll get a hash called params. And this has all kinds of data about the method, the HTTP method. It also has any form element name attributes that you had in your form, etc., etc. So Rails takes care of parsing the HTTP request along with everything that's passed in that HTTP request and puts those into a nice little hash that we can use to access that data. In addition, when we're actually creating our views, there's a bunch of helpers that let us make form elements for commonly used things in forms. And the thing is, these are actually really nice because sometimes some of the form things you do are really tedious to do by hand. For example, when you're doing a date field, you want to have something for the day, the month, the year, and actually generating that by hand is kind of a pain. So first, we're going to take a look at a piece of code that shows kind of what a form looks like in HTML. And the important things to think about are that there is an action and method attribute on the form, and there are named inputs. So let's take a look at this. Let's open up the browser, and so here is a simple form. And some of the elements to see, is this big enough for everybody in the back? Can you guys see that? Okay, great. So we have the opening tag of the form, which gives an action. And what the action is basically the URI that the form is going to be submitted to. And then there's a method, which in this case is post. Right? Remember we talked about get, post, put, delete, the basic HTTP methods. This one is post. Then you have a bunch of labels and inputs. So the label basically says what is the, the text that's going to go next to this form element, and then you have inputs. There's a few different kinds of inputs shown here. There's a text input with the name, movie title. There's a select with the name, movie rating. The important thing to look at here is that the way we've constructed the names is in a particular convention. And in this convention, what we're doing is we have the model name, movie, and the field that form element is going to fill in that model. I'll get into a bit about why do we want to do it this way. What does this convention get us in the next couple slides. So that's the HTML output, actually, of the view, right? How do we generate that form in Rails? So we can use a bunch of helpers. There's URI helpers for actions. I think that was covered probably in the last lecture. Some of the URI helpers like movie URI or movie new URI and stuff like that. So we can use that for the action. However, we still need the method. We can also use the form field helpers that actually, given a particular model and a field, will generate the form element for you. So let's take a look at an example of that. So here is a snippet of Haml that shows a few of these helpers. So at the very top, you'll see that there's form tag, movies path, do, right? So this is opening a block in Ruby. And all of the things that are in here are going to be contained within that form tag, right, until we reach the end of that Ruby block. Notice that you didn't have to put much in there. You just put movies path. It gave you the path. By default, it'll give you the method of post for a form. Now, there's also the next one, which is an example of using a label helper. It basically looks like for your movie model and your title field, the text that should go next to it is title. And it automatically will generate the for as well as the text and the title. And then you can actually put the actual form element in by just saying text field, again the model and the field that's going to go into. So using these helpers is pretty convenient. One thing that's not shown here is, for example, the date time helper, which lets you, basically use a single function or a single method in your view that will generate 3 different fields for your date, the day, the month, and the year. Finally, we have a submit tag that, we can pick what text goes in there. And that generates all of this, which basically gives you the name of this tag, what kind of type it is, and what text is on it. And that, if we have a little end here in Haml, that'll end the form tag, and all of that will be contained within the form. So the reason why you want to use these form field helpers and you want to do your names like movie title and so on is that when you look at your params hash, you can actually just pick out movie out of the params hash, and that will give you a hash of all the options that are set that you can directly pass into the model to create it. right? So you can do movie.new params movie, and it'll generate it. So we'll take a look at that in a second. But that's the big reason why you want to use these helpers and why you want to name things in that particular way.